I'm back, bitches. Did you miss me, bitches?
Hello ladies, gents, and non-binary mates, and welcome back to Beauty in the Bookcase. So today we're going to do something a little bit different. It's still related to books, I promise. I decided that I was going to go back in time and I was going to read the first chapter of like the 3 books that I've written / am writing. You're going to see I'm only going to have like the first about like 5 minutes of each one, because if not, this video is never going to end. Either in the description below or like in a card up there, I'll put the link to the full videos if you're interested in hearing the rest of those chapters. Essentially, I'm going to tell you the title of the book, the genre, the years / ages I was when I wrote them, and then just give you a brief synopsis of what it's about. And then in between each one, I'm gonna kind of talk a little bit about like what I thought was good, what I thought wasn't as good, what I've kept throughout the years, how I've changed, and all that. And then at the end, I'm gonna give you like a quick little summary of these themes that emerged throughout all the stories. I'm gonna just give you a little cringe warning, because the first one that we're gonna look at I wrote in middle school, so don't roast me too hard. I was like 13, thanks. After they left, I felt like a huge weight had been lifted off my shoulders. I mean, I didn't mind their company. I actually enjoyed it, but my magic was driving me insane. One more minute and I would have had to put on sunglasses, and I don't think I have an explanation for why I was wearing them inside and at night. I remembered my home, and once I realized I couldn't take it anymore, I had to know what was happening, so I tried tapping into my dad's mind. I knew there I'd get everything I had to know to be sure everything was okay. No luck. Instead of trying my mom, I tapped into Kyle, my brother's mind. I now saw through his eyes what he saw. I saw the hallways, him going down the stairs. My mother was on the long kitchen table crying. He comforted her until my father came in. I want this to be over, but your crying isn't letting me think. I wasn't very shocked by that. Neither was Kyle, but my mom was. She never did know when he'd throw one of his tantrums. Dad, I'm not feeling very good lately either, and we also want this shit to be over, but we know there's something we can do. And trust me, yelling at Mom isn't making anything better, said Kyle fiercely. I had never been this proud of him. You do not disrespect me, even less in front of your mother. I am your father.
I am your father.
Hey! I am your mother!
Ha! You've never been a father to me, and even less to Brittany. Please calm down, you two, said my mom, choking back some tears. I think you should go. She didn't say a word, just left. At the precise moment she walked out of the room, Kyle lounged himself forward and now had my dad pinned down. I pushed myself out of his mind. It was a lot harder to push myself out of someone's mind than to push myself in, especially when I'd spent a large amount of time in their heads. I knew what I was doing was wrong, but I couldn't take it anymore. At least I'd be able to go to bed tonight knowing that my family was okay for one more night, unless Kyle killed my dad. Although that was unlikely. What surprised me most about tonight wasn't the fact that my brother and my dad were fighting, but what Kyle said to him about him not being a good father. I knew he thought that. He knew I thought he wasn't the best father either, but never thought he'd tell him to his face. Tonight had been full of surprises, but I still wanted to go home. I had so many questions, but my number one right now was why Kyle said that to my father. Our father. I knew him, and it was very rare of him to act like this. I felt something was wrong, but I wasn't sure what. All I could think of right now was that look of hatred toward my brother my father had, because he did not want the throne. I was guessing that was the issue he had with my brother. I thought that's why he couldn't bear to spend a second in his presence. I felt that lust, the desire my brother had to say those words to my father, to fight him, but I never thought he'd do it. Another thing I still didn't understand was why my father looked at Kyle with so much hatred just because he refused to be king. There had to be something else, something he had buried deep inside him, something that I had to dig very deep to find. It wasn't normal for a father to hold a grudge against his son for so long. It wasn't normal for a father to have so much hatred and resentment toward his own son, his only son. But those were answers I'd need to wait to find out. I didn't go to bed yet. I was far too worried to sleep. So I cleaned everything up and finished reading my book. When I looked at the clock, it was past midnight, so I figured I had to go to bed. I turned off the lights and walked toward my room down the dark hallway that was only lit by the moonlight that came in through the window. I sat in my bed for a few minutes and looked around. I still was not used to this. It was all so strange. I reached down to the floor and grabbed my bag. I took out a big book full of pictures and started looking at them. There were pictures from when Kyle and I were younger. Some were of my friends and I when I lived in Texas. Others were family pictures and things like awards and newspaper clippings about some of the things my parents had done for our small country. I went back to the pictures of my friends in Texas and reminisced about those times when I had a partially normal life. I took out a picture of me and my best friends, Shane and Kylie, at a birthday party. I wore a simple outfit, just a red plaid button-up shirt with shorts. So did Kylie and Shane, who wore plain t-shirts, jeans, and cowboy hats. We were at some ranch and I actually looked happy, but that was before everything got complicated. I smiled and put the picture away. I laid my hand on a picture of Shane, Kylie, and I, and something strange happened. Instead of being inside one of their minds, I was pushed out. I knew there was something wrong. That only happened when a person pushed you out, and only shields were able to do that, and neither Kylie nor Shane were shields. They were both mortals. I let it go. It was probably nothing, so, once again, I pretended to sleep and waited for morning light. That was a tough one. Sorry. I hope you cringed slightly less than I did. Mind you, I wrote this when I was like in middle school and high school, so give me some leeway with that. I will say, I mean, I'm still very much a heavy description kind of gal, but I do think that I kind of fell into the pitfall of like play-by-play overly descriptive. Like there were just things that I was like, okay, you don't need to tell us like this room was here and then I saw this and then I did that and then I said this and then they said that. And I think, you know, I kind of had the same issues when it came to exposition. I think instead of pacing myself and revealing information as it was kind of necessary, I did have in moments where I did tend to like info dump. There were so many plot holes in this, let me tell you. Like, I don't know, I mean, maybe I did answer these things and I just don't remember because I haven't really looked at this story in forever. But there were things that I mentioned, like seeing violence before, who knows and who doesn't know magic, her being raised among humans, when her brother decided he didn't want to be king. Like, I just have these things of why the dad is like so hateful of the brother. There's just like all these points that I don't remember having touched on later on. Yeah, I felt like there was a lot of things that I was setting up that I don't think I ever actually gave you the answer to. Another thing that I noticed was just like an inconsistency with locations, because I started off very much like, oh, it's in England and, you know, she misses England and she wants to go back to England, and I mentioned England like a million times. But then she's kind of talking about Darklust and, you know, as a separate country. Like, I know in my mind when I created it, Darklust was like within the geographical confines of like England, but it wasn't part of England. I think another thing that I struggled with was characterization. I was very weirded out with how I wrote Dimitri, because to be fair, this is a character that I've thought about throughout the years, and I remembered him being a lot more badass, and this introduction we have of him is so like chill and soft. I think the characterization for the brothers, I don't remember if they even show up later. I didn't really think to flesh them out. I don't really think that they were concrete people. They had no depth to me. Whereas I think, you know, we have like somebody like Kyle, right? I think Kyle and her dad and even her mom are fairly well defined people. I believe that they are, you know, individuals. I believe that they have motivations and feelings and all these other things that a good character should have. I don't think it was all terrible. I think the general like bare bones of it I like. I think everyone was pretty well defined, and you can straight off the bat see kind of like the turmoil and the challenges of, you know, that this family is feeling and facing. I think the intrigue was pretty good. I think we have kind of this desire as a reader to figure out like what the heck is going on with like these family dynamics and what's going on, like, you know, with the actual war and, you know, who can you trust, who can't you trust. You kind of have this conflict of her feeling like her friends might be lying to her about them also kind of having powers, which is also really interesting. So I think it did good on that front. I think the world building is not that bad. I think the whole New Jersey thing is kind of random. Overall, I think I did a pretty good job with establishing kind of like what are the parameters of this world, how did we get here. You know, I think there's things that obviously need to be tightened up, but I think overall I had a fairly good understanding of what this world was. So her journal breathed for her only, because in it she lived. She kept poems and pictures, and sometimes the words in there were real only to her. She rushed through years and memories and only stopped when today's pages opened before her. The mountains before her were not the same imposing curves of years before. They were far below, and the clouds rested well above them. She looked on and traced every curve of the landscape, and her eyes could find no rest, no stopping point. She lifted her pen. Mountains curved like lips perched. No. Oh, no. Breeze, tell me why you... Breeze, you... Warning! Make leaves shake. Tremble? What secrets do you hide? Idiot, what lines do you write? Trees, green, emerald, jade, verdant, with flowers? Aromatic, blooming, lush. Mountains, the same giants as usual. Try something new. What about a house? Her eyes scanned her scribbles. It was some cruel joke that she felt such an urge to write, yet every time a pen met her hand, the words escaped her. Sometimes, as she stood in the kitchen humming a song over the rice, she'd think up pretty words to sing to the tunes. But when she finally had time to sit and write them down, she'd forgotten. Life had become a different sort of hustle and bustle for Salome, after the nest had emptied. Elena had always been the one to do the cooking and cleaning along with Rosario. She was 10 years older than Salome, and being the firstborn, she'd had responsibilities that the other kids didn't. They were free to play, she was free to pick up after them. After Elena had married, Rosario had expected Raquel to pick up where Elena had left off, but Raquel was too busy playing with Salome. Salome's wandering spirit had been cultivated by her sister. Despite being 7 years older than her, Raquel had always felt closer to Salome than Elena, and she liked to wake Salome up early on Saturdays, cleaning days, although with Rosario every day was cleaning day. And they'd go play in the puddles and try to climb on neighbors' cows until Rosario found them and yelled at them to stop tormenting those poor animals. Rosario would have them wait for her when they reached the house, and while she was off looking for rags they could use to wipe down the table, Diego would come in with Mateo, both dirty from working in the garden, which meant throwing dirt at each other for 15 minutes, and would whisk them all away to the bakery. Rosario would expect them with a scowl that would soon vanish, as Diego planted a kiss on her cheek and handed her a slice of cheese flan. Salome was snapped back from her memories by a shuffling behind her. She raised her eyes cautiously, and hidden under the shade of her tree, she saw a group of men, coffee plantation workers, stumbling through the canopy that broke off toward her cliff. She didn't know any of the men, but their uniforms betrayed a part of their identity. They all wore the long-sleeve shirts with the trousers held up by dark leather belts. Their identities were mostly concealed by their hats, but one of them let his rest on his back, keeping it close to him with a piece of rope tied around his neck. A mess of black curl strands frantically in the breeze. Their hand-woven baskets, which were typically empty in the mornings, were filled with strange things. Salome could see scribbled pieces of newspaper, red and blue rags, and from the curly-haired man's basket, of which she could only see what spilled over since he had his back to her, she saw the sharpened edge of a bayonet, a rusting gun barrel, and freshly sharpened machetes. The men spoke in hushed voices of which Salome only caught hisses. Some larger fabric seemed to be pulled over the curly-haired man's basket, the wind making it undulate like the waves at the dock. A sudden gust blew the blanket away, and as the others went in search of it, the dark curls shifted quickly, looking for any witnesses, and coffee bean eyes were revealed to Salome at once. The man was darker than she was, handsome in a rugged way. Salome saw fear in his eyes, but for a moment. She hoped the terror in hers would make the man certain she would say nothing. And why would she? She understood nothing of what she saw and only hoped to leave quickly after they did. The blanket recovered and once more draped over the basket, the men left, none of them taking notice of Salome, except for the curly-haired man. She lingered over his appearance but for one more second as she allowed herself to breathe again, and as she regained her composure, she thought of his coquille-colored skin, a perfect shade of copper, trigueño as they called it, but Salome preferred her palette of the world better. Feeling safe once more, she gathered her things and quickly went home. She walked in through the small wooden door into her humble home. Her mother was in the kitchen muttering to herself as she prepared a sancocho to take over to Mrs. Pia Rodriguez's, whose husband had recently passed. Should I take her to her after the wake? No, then everyone will have brought something and I'll look insensitive. What if I take it before? Would that be weird? Ugh, I'll just take it when I take it, who cares? Rosario muttered to herself. Bendición, mami, Salome said as she took a seat at the table. Dios te bendiga, mija. May he also have mercy on you so I don't kill you. Lares is a very special place in my heart, not just because it was my final project, ended up being my final project, but you have Salome and then you have Sebastian, and the thing with Sebastian was that before my mom had my sister and then me, she was pregnant with another child. His name was going to be Sebastian, and he's always kind of had a presence in our life, and so when I started writing this, I dedicated it to my brother, you know, and I was kind of like, well, he didn't get to write his own story, I'm just gonna write one for him. First big obvious change is just point of view. I wrote Bloodlust in first person. I very rarely, if ever, write in first person anymore. Like with a first person narrator, it's really hard to be descriptive. So with third person, I felt like I had a little bit more freedom to describe setting, because setting is kind of essential to this plot. I think it's kind of essential to all three plots, actually, now that I think about it. This story is so regionally specific that I needed that setting to be explained. And the thing is, right, when you grow up in Puerto Rico, you have a bit of a clear geographical understanding. I think when you don't, you kind of assume everything is a beach, and my story does not take place in the beach, it takes place up in the mountains. And so it was really important to kind of really describe that. And there's another thing that I did a lot with in this book was have a lot of really culturally specific elements. There's a lot of talk about food, there's a lot of talk about religious traditions that I didn't know didn't happen everywhere until I moved from home. There's a lot of just terms of endearment and colloquial things that make it really Puerto Rican, that I really enjoyed. I think, we still have a lot of description. I think it's less kind of the play-by-play, feels a little bit more focused. I think I introduce a lot of characters, and I think that might be a bit overwhelming just because it's so hard for you to keep things straight, You're kind of okay, well, wait, who is this, who is that? And the thing was, at least in Bloodlust, everyone, I mean, I don't remember if the brothers play that big a role, but everyone else, at least, is important to the story. Whereas with Lares, I mean, the parents are super important, Sebastian is super important, Salome is obviously super important, but we kind of have this introduction to all of her siblings, and quite frankly, only Raquel kind of plays a role, and it's very much in the background. So I do think that could have been information that I gave late. I could have just been she's the youngest of 5, her older sister used to do this, but then it fell onto Salome. Then you can introduce Raquel and Mateo with their little story, then the other sister, the other siblings could have come later in a quick memory or something, because it did feel a little bit there's a lot of people and a lot of names that I'm supposed to remember, and as a reader I would hate to see all these names, right, with all the siblings, and then be okay, and then they never come up again. Why were they in chapter 1? I honestly think the dialogue is good. To be fair, that first chapter has gone through a million revisions. I suck at dialogue. I'm awful. I've gotten better at it. But it was catastrophically bad in Bloodlust, as you saw. And I struggled a bit while I got my footing with Bastards of Young. But I think the dialogue was really strong. I really, once more, to go back to harping on the whole family relationships, I think that conversation that Salome has with her mom, I mean, you instinctively can see this relationship, right? You understand the dynamic, you understand the relationship. There's a little bit of tension there, but it's not her mom hates her, You can see that it's all just her mom just being frustrated and wanting the best for her. Later on, you get to meet her dad, and her dad is adorable, and I love him so much. But I think the dialogue overall is really good. I think it's very distinct. I think it really encompasses the voice of like the people that I'm trying to introduce. Yeah, I can write you beautiful descriptions and then I'm like, how do people talk to each other? What does a conversation sound like? Because it's not like whatever I wrote. I think the intrigue is really good because I think, unlike, I mean, in Poreless you kind of already have that conflict established, but I think so much of that first part is about like her meeting her neighbors that we're not really understanding what the conflict is with the country, and so many other things are happening around it, like the family and then with her friends, and I think there's too much happening, whereas here I think it's streamlined that intrigue into the conflict, right? We have this mysterious guy, we have, you know, these weapons and something that clearly was meant to be secret happening. She meets up with him again at the end of the chapter and he's kind of being all dark and mysterious. And I even think, and this is breaking my little descriptive heart, but that like there's a big chunk of that first chapter that could even go away and just have a start. Like there's so much like everyone's waking up and this is what the mom does and this is what the dad does, but an hour before their daughter did this and she went to the cliff and here's her relationship with the cliff and blah blah blah. And that cliff is really important, not just because that's where she sees him for the first time, but like overall, like to her as a character, that cliff is like very important. But I kind of felt like we could just be like, she walks toward the cliff, that's where we start, and then bam, there's the action. Becca chucks a stained copy of the Daily Mirror into the bin. The headline, "The Filth and the Fury," poking out as the paper gets soaked in grease and garbage juice. His mom loves the tabloids. Their articles, vapid and absurd enough to engross her. Truth be told, there were nothing but carefully curated fluff pieces of moral panic, created to keep them distracted and dumb. He props himself up to grab the copy of Shy Talk still in his back pocket. The cover has the classic ransom-style lettering popular with fanzines. Handwritten below the title was "Not suitable for adults," a silly enough line that made him chuckle, but that he didn't entirely disagree with. He flipped through the pages in search of the review written that week about the latest Buzzcock single. That Peach Shelley really was something else. His mind soon wanders from the page, distracted by the offensive stench in the air. He can't help but note the old stains and cigarette burns on the carpet that serve as ghosts of misfortune past. Once white curtains have browned and singed from their occasional contact with a poorly placed candle or poorly disposed of cigarette. Their presence feels redundant in a place where privacy is more of a quixotic concept than a fact. Nauseated by the smell coming from the sink beside him, he opens up the window in the kitchen and starts moving dishes over to the table to reveal the tap and a damp sponge that had been buried months ago. As he washes up, he opens up the little fridge in the corner and pulls out one of the few remaining cans of pineapple chunks, which he eats in an attempt to have some semblance of supper while humming along to the Pistol's Problems. While drying the dishes, he hears the jingle of keys. When the door finally gives way, it creaks and wobbles, threatening to fall at the gust of a heavy wind or a harsh push. His mom comes staggering in, grateful the door was unlocked so she didn't need to struggle with the lock in her drunken stupor. "Are you fucking kidding me?" Exasperation in his voice. "Don't start." The words come out in a near whisper as she steadies herself against the wall to pull her shoes off. "Don't start," she says. "You're drinking our money. Actually, should I say my money, since we have been eating fucking canned fruit for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. You are unbelievable." "Oh, quit your shouting. My head is killing me." Yeah, I wonder why. Just as the words leave his mouth, his mom gets sick all over the floor. Reaching his breaking point, he drops the dish in his hands and chucks the empty pineapple can in the bin. As his mom slides down the wall, he rushes toward the bedroom. He grabs a black backpack and starts grabbing clothes from the floor. He has no plan for where to go, but at the moment it doesn't matter. He just wants to be anywhere other than here. He can hear soft groans coming from the main room, but they do nothing but poison him more and more. He slings his guitar across his back and grabs a few records before heading back to the main room. "You know what? Fuck this and fuck you," he shouts at her. She looks on pathetically, her body slumped on the floor, saliva dribbling from her bottom lip, and her red hair in knots. Beckett, come on, please don't leave me. I need your help, she says in a quiet tone as she runs the back of her hand against her runny nose. Help yourself. I'm done, she says, slamming the door shut behind him. Beck, no. You already killed one of your sons, you're not killing me too. The front door slams behind him, the numbers falling off, leaving an outline where they used to be. His breathing is heavy, and he balls his hands into fists to hide the fact they're shaking. His eyes dart side to side, mimicking the thoughts in his mind. What the fuck has he actually done? He feels a strong desire to run out of that building, a sickly feeling forming in the pit of his stomach. In the hall, the neighbors are sitting on a half wall smoking. They give him a quick look before carrying on with whatever they were on about. Yet, he thinks they stare at him as he walks away. He hears shouting coming from another apartment down the hall as he turns toward the stairs and feels his body tense. He can't help but look back to check she's not following him. He can picture her, holding onto the walls to steady herself, shouting at him, one shoe in her hand. The flickering lights in the hall do nothing to assuage the anxiety mounting in him. He turns a corner and starts running down the stairs. The chains around his neck clatter and clink as his body bounces down each step. He stopped outside of the building's entrance, sitting on the pavement. He checks his bag to make sure his mom's not taken all his money again. He still has a few pounds left over from his last payslip, enough to get him something from the chipper at least. He turns his olive green eyes away from the street lamps that blind him. His trembling hand instinctively reaches for the cigarettes in his leather jacket pocket. Frustration and anger wash over him as he realizes he left them somewhere in the flat, but refuses to go back, unwilling to deal with his mother for another second. Going somewhere? A voice comes from behind him. Beckett jumps at the sound, despite the voice being deep and gravelly. His mind assumes the worst as his heart catches in his throat. He turns to see a hunched man in a dirty robe and slippers. It's the old man from downstairs. I don't know, he says after some hesitation. You got money? Concern crosses his face. He and Beckett stand at a distance. A plane could land between them safely, yet it's the closest he's felt to anyone in a while. Some, Beckett says, trying to sound more confident than he is. Well, if you need more. His hands fumble in his left pocket. Beckett interrupts him before he can finish. It'll be okay. Will you be back? Mr. Meth asks. I don't know. The man gives him an encouraging look, trying to hide his concern. Beckett responds with a weak smile. He haphazardly shoves everything back into his bag, worried his mom will come stumbling down the steps any minute now. He turns to give the council estate one last look. A dingy, cream-colored, unsafe and unlivable but definitely affordable piece of shit passed off as housing. Thank fuck he's out of here.
Third person, again. Setting to me is really important. I set it in Manchester because it was this working class city and it didn't look great. And I really wanted a setting that kind of reflected the inner turmoil of both like society as a whole at that time and then of the actual characters. So setting is, I would say, just as important in this book. I think the characterization here is a lot better. I will say this, sometimes Beckett doesn't feel like a completely defined character, and I struggled a lot with this when I started writing this book until I realized that like that's the point, like that's the story. Beckett doesn't know who he is, so I'm kind of on this journey to figure it out with him, and that sounds like a cop-out, but I promise it's not. Like there has been like attempts and a lot of reflection on like who's this character and what does he do, why does he do it, and there have been times where people are like, he wouldn't do this because of this and that and the other, and I'm like, that is correct, I'm going to change that. And then other times I'm like, no, I feel like he would because of whatever, a plethora of reasons, but obviously you need to convince your audience of that, so there is that to keep in mind. Riker, you haven't met him in this section, but he's perfect. I've never had a character come as clearly to me as this character did. I think the mom, you have very clearly an idea of who she is. And here's the thing. So the girl in the queue, her name's Kira. You don't find this out here because originally she wasn't supposed to be like a relevant recurring character. And then people in my writing group were like, she's awesome, and if she doesn't come back, then what the hell are you doing? Why would you give us this very clear character and then not do anything with her? Again, dialogue I think here is like a vast improvement from what it used to be when I first started writing. This story to me feels the most like how actual people have conversations. Like, I can see these characters, I can imagine these conversations actually happening. You go straight basically into like conflict between Beckett and his mom. The part that you saw wasn't the actual start of it. You know, you go kind of directly into the action. That's directly plot, right? Like, we were immediately just dropped into this scenario. My descriptions are a lot more purposeful. Okay, there's a moment where Beckett is anxious and he runs his hands through his hair, which feels like a very innocuous description, right? You're like, hey, whatever, everyone does that. But you're gonna keep seeing that throughout the book. And the reason why is it's like a comfort thing for him. Like, you're gonna have these memories where you see Beckett going through a difficult time, and his mom, when she was doing, you know, better emotionally and stuff, that was her way of comforting him, right? Was to like run her fingers through his hair until he calmed down, and he just kind of subconsciously has kept that as like a coping mechanism. I think in terms of tone, this book does really well in balancing like dark and serious with a much more lighthearted, you know, side. This was really interesting to me, going back and seeing these like 3 themes that happen in all of them. The main 3 that I noticed were family. I mean, it makes sense to me for family to be such an important theme because it is like just important in my day-to-day life anyway. But it was really interesting seeing like the huge role that family dynamics play in every single one of these stories. Like, these main characters' relationships to their parents affect so much of what they do. And obviously, you know, your parents have a huge influence on who you are, and you can change that, or you can, you know, keep parts of what they taught you, but it is kind of an important part of defining yourself. And with that, another topic that I saw a lot was kind of the concept of loneliness juxtaposed with a sense of community. You know, when I wrote Bloodlust, I mean, I was in middle school and I can joke and say whatever, I was cringe and stuff, but I was really not in a good place. I was really lonely. I didn't really feel that I felt that I belonged anywhere. Just in this first chapter, this character was like, I'm used to being alone. I'm so lonely. And as much as you can be like, hey, you're harping on about this a lot, I know where I was coming from. I used that book as a way to escape kind of the stuff that was going on in my life. And it was a place where I did have friends and where things were safe and where I could just explore ideas and be sad and feel all these emotions and process things in a kind of like a contained environment. With Lares, you know, you have Salome, who's never really, you know, she has a very close relationship with her sister and with her parents, but she doesn't really seem to have a life outside of her home. Sebastian kind of comes in and disrupts that. I mean, I think Sebastian kind of has more of a role of, you know, a sense of community because he has like all these revolutionaries that he's been interacting with at work. Whereas Salome, she has her own sense of community in terms of like, you know, she has her family and her neighbors, and you know, that's kind of more her sense of community. And then, I mean, Bastards of Young, the entire thing is about like found family, and it's about, you know, Beckett feeling so abandoned in the world, and then meeting these people and seeing that he doesn't have to be alone and that things can't be different. And then the last theme is religion. I don't think I've ever set out to write a story with the intention of it being religious, but the religion just comes, and I think it's because it was such a part of my upbringing, and it's still something that, you know, I value. I have different views than I did when I was younger, and things that I agree and disagree with, but you know, I think in Bloodlust, it's not as prominent. I mean, we do have like a section in this chapter where she's kind of like praying. Then in Lares, it's pretty prominent, just because, I mean, it's such a cultural thing, right? Like, I think even if you're not like a practicing Catholic, I think Puerto Rico is kind of like Ireland in the sense of like, you have what's called like being culturally Catholic. So it's like you kind of grew up around it even if you didn't practice it, so it's kind of interwoven. But you know, my main character Salome is a Catholic, and so of course that the idea of, you know, war and death, you know, a lot of it kind of is a challenge for her to accept because of her religious beliefs, because that's not, I mean, I say that knowing full well that, you know, with the Crusades in the back of my mind, but that's not what this conversation's about. And then in Bastards of Young, there's a character who's a priest, and he's kind of the one paternal figure that Beckett has. He's kind of this safe person that he went to after his dad died. They meet up again as he's, you know, he's 23 and he's changed, but he's still kind of needing that presence, and it not in the sense of like, you know, this person's like harping on like, oh, you need to go to church and do this and do that, but instead of just having kind of like this presence in his life that's positive and trying to help him. And as always, thank you guys so much for watching. If you liked it, make sure to leave a like, make sure to subscribe for more videos like these, and make sure to hit that notification bell so you know when I upload next. As you know, I'm incredibly inconsistent. If you have any recommendations on what I should do next, whether it's a book or I don't know, if you want me to like review something else or talk about something specific about writing, let me know in the comments below, and I will see you guys next time.